Hi, everybody. My name is Grace Bubeck, and this is one of the part two conversations in the Life Challenges series, which means that we're talking about the same topic again after about a year. And today I'll be speaking with Joan Tollifson on cancer as an awakening journey. Hi, Joan, and welcome again.
Hi, Grace.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me again, and greetings to everybody. I see many people I know, and some people I don't. So I guess maybe in case there's anyone here who didn't see part one or hasn't followed my writing and doesn't know the history of what's been going on in terms of my cancer, I'll just give a brief recap of that.
Mm-hmm.
Late in 2017, I was diagnosed with an anal cancer, and I had surgery. I had a colostomy, so I now have an ostomy bag that I wear. And then after the surgery, I had radiation and chemotherapy. And I think the last time we talked last year, Grace, was right after I had finished the chemotherapy and radiation. I didn't know yet whether it had worked, but
yes,
my
right.
hair was starting to come back in, and I think that's when we talked before. And so just to kind of now go on to, so what's happened since then with the cancer is I did have the exams and scans. They have to wait several months after the treatment is finished in order to do the tests and scans and everything to see if it's gone. And so in, I think, June, I had those exams and scans, and there was no sign of the tumor, no sign of cancer anywhere in my body. So it was basically really good news. And so for a moment, I sort of thought, okay, well, that's done. And then I think the main thing I've realized in the last year is that it doesn't really end, at least not for several years. If you live that long, it doesn't end. And, you know, so I had regular follow-up appointments with my oncologist, and my white count went way down, and then it came back up again, you know, and they're sort of monitoring all these things. And then pretty soon it's time for the next 6-month check, because they follow you regularly for the first 2 years. And meanwhile, I had learned that statistically, people with my cancer at the stage it was at, 45% of us are still alive in 5 years, which means 55% of us are dead. So, you know, it was like I had cervical cancer when I was in my 20s, and that's a very easily treatable cancer. It's one of the best cancers to get. And, you know, the recurrence rate is almost nothing. So it's like 2% or something. So this was very different. And so late in this last year, 2018, I had my 1 year scans and exams. And again, good news, no sign of cancer anywhere. And then I started developing pain in my back and my hip, and it was actually hard to walk in the beginning. It's better now. Anyway, my oncologist had said that I should tell him if I was experiencing unusual back pain. So the next time I saw him for a regular appointment, I mentioned that I had back pain, and he said, well, we'll wait a month, see what happens, and if it's still there, we'll do a nuclear bone scan. So I knew that bone cancer was sort of a possibility. And so it didn't go away. So he did the nuclear bone scan, and the results came back, and the results indicated that my cancer had metastasized to my bones and was in my pelvis. And the doctors didn't seem to have any doubt about that. It was just, this is what's happening. And I was told, you know, now that it's metastasized, we consider it incurable. So from now on, the treatment focuses just on managing it. We can't cure it. And they ordered another different test, a different kind of scan, to get a closer look at it, and also to see if it had spread to any organs anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So I had that scan, and then I go in to the appointment, you know, sort of imagining that I'm probably going to be told that there's cancer all through my body and I have 2 months to live or something like that. And instead, my oncologist comes into the room, smiles, and cheerfully announces that, oh, now we think it's not cancer after all. Wow. And he said, you know, we can't be totally sure, but we think now that it's weak bones, osteoporosis, insufficiency fractures, spinal deterioration, and arthritis. And as one of my friends joked, who would have ever thought that would sound like good news? But it did. And so they'll have another scan in March. So, you know, there's still a possibility that it could turn out to be cancer, but they seem now quite convinced that it probably isn't. So, so all it is my bones crumbling and deteriorating, which is, and I turned 70 this past summer. So, you know, this is basically, I'm kind of, you know, moving into old age, and I have many friends who are older than I am, and, you know, and so I'm aware of what's happening with them and also with myself. And it is a process where things just start to fall apart. You know, friends are dying, and, you know, people start falling and they start breaking bones, and they, you know, we lose hearing, and we get dementia, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a process of things falling apart. So,
George, can I interrupt you for a second here?
Sure.
I know you were going to do your initial bit, but it just occurs to me that, you know, there is a theme there that really is typical of the cancer experience, which is that, you know, once you've had cancer, it's like cancer's always somewhere in the picture, you know. Even if it isn't for you, it will be for the oncologist, who will want to check for this and check for that. And, you know, and it makes sense to do that because, you know, cancer does come back. But it also just creates a kind of very, at least at the beginning, a situation where you're really living with the unknown and the possibility of cancer coming back in a, you know, it's like the medical system really generates that suggestion.
Well, it didn't really, you know, when I had cervical cancer, it wasn't really like that. You know, I mean, I did have more regular pap tests and stuff for quite a while, several years or something. But because the cancer wasn't that serious and easily treatable, it didn't really evoke those kinds of feelings. I don't remember feeling particularly anything about going in for my pap tests or something. Whereas this is a more, you know, more serious cancer. And it does do that. I mean, I've sort of realized that, you know, I'm on this roller coaster that's going to be continuing at least for the first 2 years are the main ones where they look for recurrence, and then on to 5 years, which is where they kind of stop following you with that kind of regularity. So, and of course, when you're in treatment and chemo and radiation and stuff, you run into a lot of other cancer patients who, you know, have had one cancer after another. And, and so you do get a picture of this as, and it is a disease that in large measure affects older people, not always, of course, but so it becomes more and more something that that you may face as you go into old age too.
Yes.
So.
And how was that roller coaster for you? I mean, how was that lived at the time? You know, when you thought you had the cancer.
Right. Well, I kind of was going to get into all that, you know, and talking into sort of, yeah, I mean, I think it was, for me, it was, I mean, I'm very grateful for sort of the spiritual perspective and the spiritual path that I've been on for all my life, because it really has given me a perspective and some, you know, abilities or whatever that I think are very useful. So I didn't experience tremendous fear. I can't say there was no anxiety. Like when I left that appointment after he told me it probably wasn't cancer, I could feel my intestines unwinding in the car coming home. So I can't say there was just no anxiety, but I wasn't really, I didn't feel particularly fearful. I never experienced anger, angry that I had cancer, or bitterness or anything like that, or why is this happening to me? Mostly I've been in good spirits through the whole thing. I did have a few meltdowns, but they were just a few and they were short-lived. So mostly I've been in a pretty good place with it. And I think it's been really helpful. You sort of like, one of the capacities that we have as human beings is to imagine everything that could happen to us. And that's a useful capacity in some regards. I mean, it allows you to come up with a living will and make somebody your power of attorney for healthcare. And like, I live in a part of the country where earthquakes and wildfires are a big danger. So, I have a list of things that I will take if a wildfire evacuation notice comes, and I have prepared some ostomy supplies and they're ready to go if I need to evacuate. And I have a pair of shoes and a flashlight near my bed in case there's an earthquake and I have to walk through glass, in the dark. I mean, these are the kinds of things that make sense. They're intelligent. And it's where that ability to imagine future scenarios is actually helpful. But what isn't helpful, of course, is thinking about, oh my God, what if there's an earthquake and the ceiling comes down on me, blah, blah, blah. Then that's like Mark Twain said, I've been through some horrible things in my life and some of them actually happened. So it's like, and so I think I've been pretty good at not going down those avenues of thought that aren't really that helpful, about, and it was, I did feel some fear before the radiation. And the radiation was the scariest part, because they basically, told me I would be experiencing burns in my, where they were shooting the radiation, which was my private parts, basically. And they gave me a pretty graphic picture of what I'd be going through, and it didn't sound. It actually turned out to be not. I thought I'd be in level 10 pain for the whole time, and I wasn't. So it was actually better than I expected. But anyway, and I had a bad reaction to the chemo. My white count went way down, so they had to decrease the dose the second round. So, which is part of what puts me at greater risk now for metastasis and stuff. I didn't have the full dose that they wanted to give me. Yeah, so, and the more I've been on this roller coaster and realized that I'm on it and that it doesn't end, kind of, the more you sort of learn how to ride with it, kind of, like you get the picture that, every 6 months I'm going to go through this, blah, blah, blah. Or in March, there's going to be another scan, et cetera, so. Yeah. And the other thing that I was just going to mention by way of introduction was that, that the other thing we kind of went into in my last conversation with you a year ago was my descent from the transcendent into the bowels of the human experience, as I put it. And, and again, just for anyone who didn't hear that interview or hasn't been following my writing, I just would say that the cancer, particularly the cancer I had, which was an anal cancer that had invaded my vagina. So it was literally in all the parts of the body that you're not supposed to mention in public, and, that are considered, dirty and all that. So it was like, I was like, literally, it brought me very much into the body and into, I've dealt with a lot of poop in the last year up close, and so it's really brought me into the body and into the nitty gritty of life. And so that's been, that's been part of the journey. And I think in the last year, it's been more kind of a balance of, because there is obviously something in the transcendent that's very important, sort of seeing that we're not actually encapsulated inside this separate body in a world of separate fragments. And, there is this vast awareness that's unbound and and open and beginningless and endless, and being able to sort of see that the story is just a story, even no matter how relatively true it is, it's just a story, including everything I just told you about my cancer. You know, so it's like that's all very, very important, and that's certainly part of any spiritual path. And you call that the transcendent, you know, that but I find that for me, and maybe this isn't true for other people, but for me, you know, some of these transcendent pointers, especially in Advaita and so on, where you're sort of invited to identify as awareness and not as the person. And for me, what that does is it kind of creates a kind of duality. You know, there's awareness here, and then there's the person, and there's me in there sort of trying to identify as awareness and not slip back into the person. And I find that it feels like there's this kind of subtle effort to be awareness and not the person. And so that for me has not been a particularly helpful direction, beyond just sort of being able to notice when I'm coming from the position of being encapsulated little Joan and when I'm coming from, you know, a more spacious place. But so for me, it's like been more helpful to sort of go into whatever's here than to sort of back up from it. You know, like with physical pain, for example, you know, some teachers would say, well, just pay attention to the fact that you are awareness and the pain is just appearing in the awareness. Whereas for me, what I've found helpful is just going really deeply into the pain, you know, not thinking about it, but with awareness, just going into it and just exploring it as sensation. And suddenly everything changes, you know, and it becomes bearable and even interesting. And so, and the same with, you know, I find that anything, I mean, this Kleenex or this water glass or this shirt or a human face or a pen, you know, anything, if you look deeply at it, a tree, you know, the more deeply you look at it, the transcendent is right there. I mean, it's like there's an infinity in every single thing. You can't come to the end of it. It's like, it's not what we think it is. It's, you know, we have a word like, this is just a Kleenex, it's just trash, you know, or something. But in really looking at it, it's an infinite world, and it's beautiful, and it's, you know, so anyway, so for me, the transcendent, it's more helpful to sort of go in, zoom in rather than zooming out. Yes. Though I think they both have their place, and different ones work for different people. And so I would never say
at different points also, I think.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
Because really what you're saying, I mean, you had a transcendent phase, you know, and what you're saying is that the experience of having cancer kind of invited you more into the imminent experience of this moment-to-moment unfolding of this experience, you know?
Yeah, and I think it, you know, I can see in my own path that there's been both at different times, you know, like Toni Packer who was my main teacher, actually had both very strongly. I mean, she had you know, she always was pointing to spacious, open, boundless awareness, you know, and open presence and seeing through the self. But at the same time, she was very kind of grounded in, you know, the sound of the birds and the sensation of the body meeting the chair. And so she really had both in a balance. And then I went more in a transcendent direction, got into kind of Advaita and that sort of thing. And so, and then Zen is much more earthy and down to earth. And, you know, in like, there's an old Zen koan, you know, what is the Buddha? And the teacher replies, a dried shit stick, which basically in our language would mean used toilet paper. And, you know, which was certainly relevant for me as a koan. Anyway, so yeah, so I think, you know, we kind of move through both when we need them. And I think the other thing that the spiritual perspective has given me is the sense that the so-called hardships in our life, they're really part of the dance, and they're a vital part of the dance. And somehow they, you know, like they are the grit that creates the pearl, or the, the mud in which the lotus grows, and that somehow there's something there that's important. And if life were just nothing but sunny days and pleasant, moderate weather, and you know, nothing ever happened, nobody ever died, we just lived forever in eternal youth, I think something really vital would be missing, you know, because so, you know, really seeing the blessing, if you want to put it that way, in whatever happens. And
would it be okay to pause here and go into that a bit more? Because
that's kind of what I wanted to say by way of introduction. So,
because you know, to me, that's really part of the inquiry with this theme of life challenges. You know, the idea originally was to take situations that are known or considered to be challenging to people, you know, that are stressful, and to talk to spiritual teachers about these challenges, because the idea was that there is a, you know, the experience would be met with more spiritual maturity than by most people. Maybe, or maybe not, you know, I mean, that's to be found out. But when you say, you know, the roller coaster for you of facing the fear of maybe the cancer coming back and then it not coming back, and maybe, you know, when you have your test in March, maybe there'll be some more fear, because that'll be more of an indication of which hypothesis was true, because right now, you know, it's neither possibility is really established.
Right.
You know, so as I understand it, the test in March will kind of establish whether it's true that the cancer hasn't come back and it's just bones deteriorating, or whether the cancer has come back. So there'll be another kind of role in the roller coaster. And you know, what I hear from you, Joan, is that there is an ability to face this with more, you know, maybe maturity is not a word that you would use, but with an ability to really just allow things to be as they are. You know, to me, that's a good definition of spiritual maturity, actually, you know. Because this is what, you know, it's a mysterious thing, but somehow our knowing ourselves as beyond this reality creates an ability to also just be in this reality, in this physical reality, in a way that's much more accepting.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say we're beyond this reality, but it's sort of, this reality is, you know, there's just, I kind of see it as like there's different levels or dimensions of this reality. Like there's a subatomic level where there's just subatomic energy moving around, and there's the, you know, there's the intergalactic level where there's, you can't even see the earth, it's just a pinpoint, and there's the human level where there's our life story, and there's the sort of experience we can have of, and the reality of open, spacious, unbound awareness. And then there's the experience of, you know, feeling like a separate person. And they're all just kind of different levels or facets of this diamond, or this thing that we are, what this is, what this dance, whatever this is, you know. And so I've become less and less inclined to sort of try to nail down what the ultimate ground of being is, you know, like Advaita has a tendency to say it is awareness or primordial awareness or something. And I've become less and less inclined to try to nail it down, you know, and just that we don't really, maybe there is no ultimate ground, or we don't know, but this whole thing feels like an undivided, seamless happening in some way. You know, I can't really find where awareness ends and these images on the screen begin. I mean, there's no boundary. It's one whole happening. And you know, I mean, I see a lot of people here who I know have had cancer or strokes or, you know, things going, health challenges, and people who also teach are here with us. And, you know, so I'm sure other people have you know, one thing that kind of struck me was that I think I was kind of good at dealing with the big stuff like cancer, but then you know, like I ordered a book on compassion, a Buddhist book on compassion from Amazon, and they delivered it to the bushes next door, and so it, you know, I didn't get it until I found it there like weeks later. And then I was like incredibly pissed off that my book on compassion had not arrived on time. And I was like, you know, I wrote this little nasty note on my Amazon thing, and you know, I was really upset. And it was, you know, it was kind of funny because I felt like I'd handled cancer quite well, but then, you know, my book on compassion is late, and I have a complete meltdown. So yeah, it's funny. But yeah, no, I do think that and not just the spiritual path, but also just aging, I think, gives us a certain perspective and you know, whatever, more equanimity on life than, you know, and you know, and I don't fear death. I mean, I feel like whatever, you know, that, I mean, you know, I fear death if someone comes at me with a gun or something. There's that instinctive kind of fear, animal fear of, you know, but I don't have a psychological, you know, dread of death or something. I don't, I just feel like whatever this is, there's no beginning or end to it. And I don't mean there's no beginning or end to Joan, but I mean, but you know, that there's no beginning or end to this whole happening. So, and I suppose that comes from the spiritual, you know, it's not belief, it's just having investigated, having really deeply explored the reality.
Yeah, you know, it's like my sense is that you're right, there's different expressions of what that spiritual reality is, but it's like knowing that there is a reality that's beyond the physically lived reality of this body and this person. You know, that's what somehow creates a different perspective onto what is lived by this body and this person. Does that make sense? You know, it's like somehow when there is a perspective that feels more deeply true than that of the person and the body, you know, then whatever is lived by the person and the body somehow cannot be taken quite as seriously. You know, it's still, I mean, you know, it's still what we live, you know, you're still dealing with your ostomy bag and, you know, your doctor's appointments and your tests and this and that. But it's like ultimately there is a reality that you're aware of that is much vaster than that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even say it's other than that. I mean, it's right here, right now. It's just this, you know? And it's not separate from, you know, the coffee cup or the sound of the voice or the Kleenex or anything. It's this, you know. And I think part of it is seeing through the illusion of the separate self. You know, seeing. I mean, there's obviously, you know, something here that we call Joan and something we call Grace, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So not to deny that, but when you know, what's the illusion is that there's this sort of little unit of consciousness, this little me that's inside here somewhere, that's like making my choices and thinking my thoughts and making my decisions, and that, you know, the fear of death is really, I think, a fear of that me coming to an end.
Absolutely.
Because, you know, every night we go into deep sleep and, you know, everything, our whole world disappears in deep sleep. And even the first bare sense of presence and awareness disappears in deep sleep, you know, and we love it. It's rejuvenating, you know, and yet there's this thought that, oh my God, death, I won't be there anymore. And it's sort of, you know, there's a sort of picture of being buried alive, like I won't be there anymore, but somehow I'll still be there and I won't be able to get the TV back on, you know. What happens next, you know, like who wins the next election and what happens next in my life, you know, and I won't know. And but of course you're not there to not know, you know. It's like the problem is just so it's like, and that, you know, that just recognizing that there's nothing, Joan is not some solid thing, you know. Joan is like, there's no real, the skin is porous, you know, there's, the air is coming in and out, the breathing, the skin is shedding, you know, I couldn't live without water and food, you know. It's like, we're not really these separate units. And, you know, I'm not the same Joan I was a year ago, much less 70 years ago, you know. Yeah. It's like there may be some kind of pattern, but even the pattern is always changing. So when you really see that there's nothing here to die exactly, I mean, you can't even find, where did Joan begin? Did I begin at birth or at conception or when my parents met or, you know, when my grandparents, you know, there's no, you know, when you really see that there isn't this little entity that we are so afraid of losing, I think that takes the sting out of death. Because I mean, I imagine it, nobody really knows what death is going to be like, because even if you've had a near-death experience, it's a near-death experience, you know. I mean, so who knows? I could be in for a surprise. Maybe I'll be sailing up to heaven, but you know, my assumption is that or hell. But you know, my assumption is that it's going to be very much just like going to sleep at night or going under anesthesia, you know. That whenever I go under anesthesia, I feel myself losing, I feel consciousness disappearing. And then there's nothing. And then suddenly consciousness is coming back up and, you know, there's the doctor.
Yes.
And, you know, there's nothing scary about it. It's just when we think of death, we think, oh, but I'll never come back again. But I won't be there to know that I'm not coming back again. You know, I think death is much harder on the people who are left behind, really. It's much harder on, you know, when you're losing someone that you love.
Well, Joan, that's where I would disagree, because death drives a lot of people to, you know, into so much fear, and the fear has to be assuaged by, you know, all sorts of treatments. And, you know, it's like, it's like it can generate so much fear.
Yeah.
And the reason why it doesn't for you is because, you know, you don't identify with that person, with that body, you know.
Well, I can't say that I don't identify in any sense with this body. I mean, there is a sense of, you know, I mean, I answer to my name and stuff. I mean, there's some sense of that's functional of location and knowing that I'm this person and not that person. But I think what disappears, either more and more or completely or whatever, is that story of being me, that sense of being this, you know. And that's where I think the fear. And then I think, I think the fear of losing that me does drive lots of our addiction and compulsion, and not necessarily all of it, but it does drive a lot of our human fear and suffering.
Yeah. And, you know, paradoxically, I think in those life challenges, there can also be a realization that we are not this body and we're not this person, even as we're going through all of what everybody else would go through, you know, the fear and the grief or the, you know, whatever it is, the anger, in some way, you know, to some extent, because, you know, you're not saying you didn't feel the thing,
No,
clearly there was a response,
it was.
but it doesn't, what I don't hear is that it totally kind of took you over and, made life unbearable for you.
Right. Right. I mean, and I don't know what would have happened if I had been in level 10 pain continuously for, 2 months. I mean, I wasn't, so I haven't had to face that challenge, but, it was level 10 pain some of the time, but not all of the time. And, yeah, I mean, it's not so much that I feel like I'm not the body. It's more like I feel like I mean, the body is a concept, it's an idea, it's a mental image. And the actuality of the body, whether you explore it with science or with meditation, is not a solid, separate thing at all. It's vibration and movement and ever-changing sensations and ever-changing thoughts and ever-changing feelings. And so I think it's, just kind of a sense of that bigger context, that bigger picture, which is what you're speaking of, maybe that there's these things it's like the weather, there's pain, and then there's pleasure, and then there's wind, and then there's rain, and then there's sun, and then there's, I'm depressed, and then I'm happy, and then I'm sad, and then I'm, all these things. It's just weather. It's kind of moving through, and the same, globally, there's a war, there's peace, there's, there's genocide, there's a wonderful act of kindness. There's, all these different things seem to be happening in every scale that you look at, from the, the tiniest to the biggest. So it's that sense of sort of, when you just feel like you're this encapsulated little person, then it's kind of like me against the universe, and me who's got to fight to stay alive, and all the stuff that the separate self gets caught up in, like, me who has to be a success, and me who has to make something of my life, and me who might have ruined my whole life, and me who should have gone to law school and didn't, and, all of that. But when there isn't that sense of being that little encapsulated me, and when you sort of really get that there's no way you can ruin your life, I mean, that's like absurd. And you can kind of relax. Yes. And just be, and I think learning more and more to be, be here now, as they say, to really recognizing that here now is all there is, all there ever is, Yeah. And the more we're simply present here, the more, the problem is always in some sort of, there might be pain here, but the problem is in some sort of mental thought construction about it.
So Joan, when you say, your first kind of movement, last year was from transcendence into the bowels of the human experience, do you mean by that it was a kind of just focusing on what's here now? Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had been, well, for a little background, I mean, the previous year, with the year that I got the diagnosis at the end of the year, I had had a very, very wonderful friendship with a man who was very much in a transcendent direction. He was becoming a spiritual teacher, and that sort of moved me in that direction. And then also one night, I was actually on YouTube looking for a particular poetry reading by Charles Bukowski. And you know how YouTube recommends things on the margin? I don't know how this ever came up when I'm looking for Charles Bukowski, but there was Mujib live in India, and I clicked on it. I don't know why. I clicked on it. I had met him years before in Chicago, at a very small gathering of 12 people or something, and it really affected me very deeply that when I met him. But I hadn't really, anyway, so I clicked on this satsang with Muji, and I got and I began watching more of them. And he has a very kind of transcendent teaching.
Yes.
So between this friendship I was having with this man who was very transcendent in his perspective. And these satsangs with Muji that I started watching, you know, I kind of got into this transcendent kind of thing, which it wasn't the first time that I've explored that, obviously, but it was, you know, as I said, we kind of come and go from these things, you know. But
yeah, we weave in and out.
Weave in and out. So I had been kind of in this very transcendent place, you might say. And then I went to the SAND conference in October, and my publisher from the UK, Julian Noyce, handed me a copy of Robert Saltzman's book, The 10,000 Things, to read while I was there. And, you know, Robert is sort of anti-transcendent, to say the least. And so I was reading this book, and it had quite a deep impact. And then I get back from the conference and I get diagnosed with, you know, anal cancer. And so, and, you know, suddenly I'm dealing with, you know, the body a lot. And so I think the combination of those things sort of,
yeah, it's like the 10,000 things really prepared you for the one thing that you were dealing with, which is anal cancer, you know.
Yeah, and what I really appreciate about Robert, I mean, there's many things Robert and I do not agree about, but the one thing that I really appreciate in his writing and how he sees things is that he really is just pointing to that all we really have is present experiencing. That's all there is, present experiencing. And we don't really know what it is or where it comes from or what it means. We can have all these theories that it's all consciousness or it's subatomic, blah, blah, blah. But really all we have is present experiencing. And he really points to sort of not needing any kind of big construct over that, like, you know, it's all this or it's all that, or you know, a guru or anything, just the simplicity of present experiencing. And he's also someone who's dealt with some very serious health problems, and so we had that in common too. We became friends and we had that in common, and you know, he has a very deep, very big heart for that sort of thing. So you know, he was someone who was going through his own very serious health challenges of a different nature at the same time I was. So, but anyway, yeah, that kind of popped the bubble of the transcendent in a way, and just brought me into the transcendent is right here in the bag of poop. It's right here in the cup of tea. It's right here in the sound of this voice. It's right here in this computer screen. It's right here. And
so when you say that since then you moved on to maybe a more balanced appreciation of the immanent and the transcendent, if, you know, we'll just call it like that for now. How would you describe that? How is that for you?
I think what I've noticed about myself over the years is that I have a tendency to get really gung-ho about whatever I'm into at that moment. You know, so if I get into the transcendent, then I get really into the transcendent, you know, and if I get into the sort of earthy Zen, whatever, then I get really into that. And if I get really into some teacher that I'm watching or something, I get really into that teacher, you know, it's sort of like, and that's something I've just noticed about myself over the years, that I have that tendency. And I think just age and wisdom, the wisdom of age, you know, sort of eventually kind of begin to realize that, wait a minute, you know, like, this is probably not the final thing, you know, that this where I am today is going to pass, and I'll be in some different place tomorrow. And, you know, I may be really resonating with the transcendent right now, and then tomorrow I'll be down in the earthy Zen world, you know, and it's a kind of, so I think I just have gotten that on a deeper level, that all of these different sort of ways that we look at things and explore them are, like we've been saying, they're kind of, they're movements, you know, and I mean, some people do seem to come up with one perspective and then they just stay with it their whole life. I mean, there are many teachers who are like that, and I've always sort of envied them. Like, why can't I do that? but and of course some people feel like I do that, you know, because I think when we look ourselves from the inside, you know, we see more of the
More of the movement than
yeah,
people.
yeah. Whereas someone looking from the outside might say, well, but you have been quite consistent, you know, in your message or something. So I think it's more just a sense of recognizing that not to land in any place, you know, but just to, and not to assume that what works for me works for everybody, and not to assume that, you know, because I have a tendency like, oh, I'm reading Robert Saltzman, and then, you know, that's the end of Muji, you know, and instead, you know, to recognize that I love both Robert Saltzman and Muji, you know, and I may be drawn more to one perspective than the other in a particular moment, but I don't need to land on one and say, this is the truth. Yeah. So I guess that's kind of where what I feel is kind of unfolded more in that way.
Yeah. Oh, you know, that's so, I love that, because I feel it's like a force field, you know, and somehow I think all of us move between those two poles of the immanent and the transcendent. I mean, I certainly know that movement in my own life. And I don't know, well, it's true that some teachers are more kind of, you know, maybe more consistent than others, but I don't know. I think when you listen to any teacher closely, you'll find those movements also.
You will, yeah.
In how they're expressing things from one year to the next, or, you know, from one satsang to the next. It's like, you know, it's almost like that's the essence of this whole topic, is that it is in this force field between the immanent and the transcendent.
And with all of us in some way, because it's like, it's so interesting to me how, you know, how do I end up watching these satsangs with Muji when I'm searching for Charles Bukowski? You know, it's like, you can't explain that. And then, you know, the next thing I know, somebody's handing me Robert Saltzman's book. I'm not looking for it. It just gets handed to me. Yeah. You know, it's like we're all in this together as one whole happening, you know, that we're not really separate, and somehow, you know, it's all playing itself out in all these different ways. Yeah.
Beautiful. You know, I think that's a good moment to kind of open up the space to people to come in also, since we're all in this together. So let me just ask whether anybody wants to come in with a question. And please feel free to ask any kind of question or comment or share your experience.
Nancy's waving.
Nancy's waving. Okay, Nancy, let me find you here on the list. Nancy
Miller.
Yeah, I got you. Okay, Nancy, you're unmuted.
Hey, Joan.
Hi, Nancy.
We know each other.
From long ago.
Wonderful.
Long ago. Well, not that long ago,
no,
too.
Not that long.
Yeah.
Well, kind of long.
So just laugh here. I just wanted, you know, I had diagnosed with cancer, when was it? April of last year. And I had to have a complete hysterectomy due to the nature of the cancer. And I remember in the parking lot before the operation, you know, you have to get there at the crack of dawn, or I don't know why they do operations this stupid hour, but anyway, you have to be there at the crack of dawn. And I'm in this parking garage of this huge hospital complex right outside of Washington, D.C. And I just had this total meltdown, you know, I was bawling my eyes out. My poor husband, he just didn't know what to do, you know, and he just like, come on, we need to get in there, you know, you have to have this operation, blah, blah, blah. And I couldn't move. I was totally overwhelmed by emotion. And that was a huge lesson for me So I've been practicing a long time just to let the emotion come up, that there was absolutely no stopping it. I mean, it was like, you could have built the dam there and it would have broken. And that was huge. And I think that some of that emotion wasn't just fear, but I do think it was grief. Grief of losing parts of yourself that, even though I wasn't totally always aware of, my inner workings, that they're still part of you, whether, you identify with it or not. And I was long past menopause. So it wasn't like that I was never going to have a kid or something like that. It was just like, hey, they're going to take out part of you and you're not going to be that anymore. It was a grieving process. The other thing was that I do remember when there was actually fear was when I had to go for radiation. And that was really different because I was right before I was, I don't know if this is typical, but in this hospital, the radiation is down in the basement, I guess, because they have to shield it and put up all these barriers or things. So you're going down into the basement, blah, blah, blah. And I just started crying again and like, I don't want to be here. This is not what I want, blah, blah, blah. And that was certainly fear. And then I'm saying this because I so appreciate what Joan said about the support staff. There were these beautiful women behind the counter, and they just, here's some tissues, here's a hug, and this is their life. They see this emotion every day, probably multiple times. And I was so taken with that it, tears, instantly almost calm me down. I'm like, oh, I'm going to get a lot of support here. There's a lot of support for this. I'm not the only one who's been through this. And these people are really amazing. So I just wanted to add that so many people think that people who practice meditation are some stoic whatevers. And it's totally not true. I mean, it's just not true. And I don't want it to be true. I don't, if I have emotions, they're gonna happen. The question, I guess, is, can you see it? That's what's going on, and it's not permanent. It's not who you are, blah, stuff like that. And Grace, the other thing I wanted to add for you when you were talking about maturity, the word that came up for me was more like equanimity. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that makes more sense, but I would hardly call myself mature, even though I'm going to beat Joan to age 70 by a couple of months.
No, I'm already 70.
Oh, you are? Oh.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, well, scratch that one.
You're just a young one, But no, I really appreciate what you're saying because first of all, yeah, the everybody on my medical team and the people, the receptionists, everybody in these places was just amazing, and I felt such love for them. But also, I really appreciate what you're saying about emotion because I don't think there's any, And by the way, Nancy also teaches meditation; she doesn't just practice it. But I don't think there's just any one way. Like, I love this thing that Katagiri Roshi, this Zen teacher, said, and he died of cancer. And he said, enlightenment is not dying a good death, meaning, that you would just be there calmly, saying some Zen poem at the last moment. Enlightenment is not dying a good death. Enlightenment is not needing to die a good death.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
There's just that space for whatever, like, when I had my meltdown over the Amazon book coming late, what didn't happen was I didn't have all these thoughts about, oh, what a terrible spiritual failure I am for.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, well, that's what erupted in that moment.
Right. Yes. Erupted is a good word.
Yeah. And, it obviously brings up all kinds of feelings, and different feelings for different people and different feelings at different moments. And I think that's so important not to, because I think sometimes in spirituality, there is this tendency to sort of feel like, you know, if I'm really awake and enlightened, blah, 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 which is, you know,
Blah, blah, blah.
anyway, you know, therefore you know, I would not melt down. I would not, you know, I will not feel these things. And that's just.
If I may come in there, you know, my sense is that there's a curious evolution that happens. And it's almost like at the same time, which is that on the one hand, you know, there is more equanimity and therefore less tendency to really be overwhelmed by feelings. And at the same time, you know, there is, I mean, when the emotion hits, when it moves through like full force, you know. So, and there isn't the thinking that this shouldn't be happening, you know. So there's the ability, the ability, the willingness, the you know, the embrace of this as happening, you know, this emotion. It's there when it's there, when it's gone, when it's gone. And so Nancy, I totally, you know, agree with you that you know, it's like, yes, there can be equanimity. And for me, the spiritual maturity is to allow both, you know, moments that are very equanimous and moments where the emotion just kind of moves. And then when it moves, you know, when it's anger, it's full anger, you know, when it's grief, it's full grief. And when it's love, it's full love. You know, I mean, it's all of it just isn't kind of hindered by thoughts about whether this should be happening or what is it about, or, you know, it's like just, you know, it's kind of bare bones.
Somebody else it seems to be waving. Well,
Yeah. Okay, Chris, hold on. Let me unmute
well,
you.
this other person has been waving for quite a while. I mean, I would like to
Oh,
hear
so somebody else?
the one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Other
I don't know her
person.
name. I'm not sure. If I know you, I don't recognize you right now.
The thing is, I'm not on the, all right.
Pointing
So
to herself.
Mia, okay. All right. So let's see. Can we go with Chris first and then we'll come to you, Mia?
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Since I've unmuted Chris already.
Okay. Hi, Chris.
Hi.
I know you
nice
had
to see you. It's
Yes.
nice to see you.
you too.
Yeah, I had some thoughts about some of the things you said. I was waiting for you to talk about death, and you did that in the end. And one of the things I discovered, just for people that don't know, I had a stroke 2 years ago. So I had a critical medical emergency, but it was quite different from cancer because it happens and then if you're lucky, you recover. And it all happens fairly quickly compared to the unknowingness of cancer. And one thing I discovered was they made a mistake when they read a scan in the hospital, and I thought I was going to die. And I discovered I wasn't afraid to die. And it wasn't exactly that, oh, I'm not afraid to die. It was more like I realized that fear of death that I thought I had, it's when the thoughts are about what's happening right now, and they're always about what's happening right now. So I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I had projected I will be afraid of death, but when I actually got at the doorstep, I wasn't. I saw that, you know, it's just a thought, and I wasn't having that thought right then. And so it was kind of a, it let me relax about that. But then other things happened around the stroke that I haven't been able to relax around. I had a really bad time in the hospital. I felt like I was a prisoner. And they didn't even seem to want to let me out. I had my daughter have to come and get me, and I left without permission. And I couldn't psychologically handle being treated like an infant. And that's how I felt anyway. And so now I'm in this fear place where I keep being afraid because they never found the cause of the stroke in spite of all these scans they did. And so I keep being afraid that this thing is going to suddenly happen again, and I'm going to end up back in that place where I'm helpless, where I don't have any control. And I know that the teaching is you don't have any control anyway, but psychologically, that's not what happens to me. So I just wondered if you have any comments about that.
Well, it's, I like to call myself a control freak, even though I see deeply that we don't control anything. But that impulse to control is very strong in human beings. And it's interesting, you know, what I was hearing and what you're saying, because having a stroke is one of my big fears, you know, and it's interesting that, one of my other big fears, you know, was being in a nursing home and having people messing with my private parts. And I actually went through that in this cancer, you know.
Right.
I have, what do they call it? You know, those tubes so that you can pee, you know.
Right.
That sort of thing, you know. And so people, it's kind of like one of the things that seems to happen in old age is that we're kind of facing all of our fears, you know, because like one of the things that happens as we age is we lose more and more control. We lose more and more independence. We lose, you know, and of course everyone has a different experience, but, you know, I might wake up tomorrow and no longer be able to live independently and take care of myself.
I think about that a lot too.
You know, my bones are crumbling. If I fall and break a hip, you know, I live alone. What's going to happen? You know, it's like, so it's kind of interesting how and for you, it's like, you know, being in the hospital. I mean, my experience in the hospital was that it was great. I loved it. It was like being in a luxury hotel, except for the vampire that came at 4 a.m. to take my blood. But you know, I just pushed a button and they brought me my meals. And they were all very nice. But, you know, see, everybody experiences these things so differently, you know, but it's interesting how in some way we're meeting our fears, we're meeting our, you know, our demons in some way.
Yeah.
You know? And it's great to see you. You've certainly recovered beautifully. I would never.
Yeah, I think I was very fortunate. I sought out people who had had strokes after me because I kind of wanted to commiserate, and I found out I was in such a better condition physically that I almost felt guilty about doing that, you know, and finally gave it up. So I was very lucky from a physical point of view. I think the effect is more psychological.
Yeah.
But I love what you said, by the way, about the compassion book. Because I have that too, you know. I mean, I think I've been, you know, I've been really working on spiritually for a long time, and you know, a lot of things I see very clearly, and then some little thing happens and it just ticks me off, you know.
Yeah.
It seems that those psychological habits just keep continuing, and it's being able to meet it in some way that I haven't quite figured out yet. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we get more relaxed about it, you know, just not taking it all so seriously too. Just
right. Because it is very funny. I mean, now you can laugh at it, right?
Yeah.
If you know, I just wanted to comment on that because one of the things that I was facing when I had to have the first surgery for cancer was that I was in the alternative healing field as a practitioner, and you know, I had absolutely nothing to do with the medical system, and in fact I was very suspicious of it, and I had tried to heal the cancer alternatively and it didn't work, and so eventually I had to face the fact that the tumor was growing, and you know, either I was going to get surgery or you know, face pretty radical consequences potentially. And so I, you know, I had to deal with this with this gut reaction to the medical system that kept coming up. And, you know, I don't know, at some point I just realized that that was part of my edge at that point, you know. It's like
Your edge, did you say?
my edge, yes, my growing edge.
Uh-huh.
In the sense that I could just question that assumption. Is it true that the medical system is not to be trusted, you know? And, you know, in the same way as like, well, of course, you know, I ended up very grateful because, you know, I'm cancer-free these days after 2 episodes of cancer. And so there was a real gift in that for me. And part of it was actually all that lifelong conditioning that was anti the medical establishment, you know, coming apart. And me losing my identity that I had at the time of being an alternative practitioner, which was kind of buttressed by my resistance to the medical system. So it's like, you know, whatever this experience throws up, it's like, wow, that's what's juicy. That's what the growing edge is, you know. That's what can be fed to the dogs, you know. I mean, it's just like it can be so it can be so good to come undone, you know, in our personality structure, because that's really all built on assumptions and thoughts and values that we happen to hold.
Yeah, the wonderful relief of letting everything fall apart.
Yeah, yeah.
As it always does. Well, somebody here is really wanting to speak.
Yes, I'll bring. Are you, Chris? Did you want to add anything, or are we?
No, I don't think so. It just one thing that occurred to me as you were speaking was, I didn't think about it till later, but I was being drugged also, and I think that affected my ability to think clearly and to, as you said, relax into it or whatever. And I don't know what you can do about that, because they're going to give you what they're going to give you, you know. But
yeah, that's part of it.
anyway,
I did have a choice. I mean, they wanted me to, you know, I said I didn't want to take my pain meds anymore, and they let me stop. And then I couldn't get out of bed because I was in so much pain. And they said, maybe you should rethink this. So I did.
Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah. Anyway, this person is really wanting to speak.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Thank you, Chris. So let me see. Let me find. Here you go. Okay, it's Mia. Let me unmute you. Here you go. You're unmuted.
Oh, hello?
Hello.
Hi. You know, you sat in front of me in study hall in high school. This is Debbie Marat.
Oh my God, Debbie, I didn't recognize you.
Right, I have the glasses and I have really long pigtails.
Oh my God.
Hands in them and everything like that. And that's how I've been saying hi. But anyway, you know, there's 2 things. I had cancer in 2006, breast cancer. And let's see. So, you know, and I've been cancer, you know, they say, how many years out are you? Well, it was 2006. And I don't know if I should tell you much about that. They missed it with 8 mammograms. They said it must have been growing for 8 years because of the size that it was. It was so deep on the chest wall that, you know how they have these 2 pieces of glass that squish your breast?
Yep.
Bottom edge couldn't go deep enough onto my chest wall to see the cancer. So every mammogram never had a tumor on it.
Wow.
And so finally, I noticed, like the Pillsbury Doughboy, you push his stomach and it goes, you know, a little dimple, a little Pillsbury Doughboy. And then, when you're reading National Geographic or the boys are in the aisles, to see all the women, I hope this isn't politically incorrect, but the women's breasts in Africa look like stacks of pancakes. There's all these little folds at the bottom, like stacks of pancakes. And I had a couple of those, and that had something to do with the pulling of the tumor. Anyway, so I noticed that, and that's how they gave me an ultrasound. And then they saw the unusually shaped tumor, and my legs were like noodles when I got my diagnosis. And I had breast cancer, okay? I had neoadjuvant chemo. You don't need to know the whole story. But anyway, I had radiation treatments and the chemo and the resection, and it was a lumpectomy in the middle, okay? Well, okay, here we are. That was 2006, and this is 2019. And November, I had a colonoscopy. I've been putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And I had the colonoscopy, and they found 2 polyps, which they removed. But I went into the colonoscopy feeling fine, except for that lousy prep. Ugh. And then they removed those. They said they were precancerous. About 2.5 months later, I was in extreme pain and hardly pooping but once in 5 days. And it's like right around my tailbone and the cheeks of my butt were in like seizure. They were so painful. And I couldn't pee hardly. So I went to the emergency room, okay? And of course, if they were gonna have to operate or whatever, they were gonna, no water, whatever. And I was there from 9 in the morning or 6 in the morning until 6 at night or 7, whatever it was. They did CAT scans. They didn't find anything like that. And, whatever, they did a bunch of tests, and then they catheterized me. And they said, do you want to leave the room? Do you want to take it out before you go? And I said, let me talk to the urologist that I'm supposed to meet with. They said, don't take it out. If you take it out, we can't see you. You have to wear that for 1 solid week. So there I was emptying pee, and my son was visiting from Austin and his wife. It was crazy. And I was in such pain, like where I sat. Even sitting up from a chair or moving, a great deal of pain, like it was in seizure. It's hard to explain what it feels like. And so I'd gotten off a medicine for emotional called Lamictal, and it's an anti-seizure drug, but it was also, your brain and your guts are very connected. So I just asked if I could go back on that, and after I went back on it, I did feel a little better. But ever since, been taking lots and lots of laxative. I've been taking, they put me on a week of Keflex, a really strong antibiotic. I hate to tell my own story so much, but the antibiotic they put me on, of course, I needed probiotics because it knocks out, everything you need. So I'm on that now. And I'm taking laxatives every day and stool softeners and whatever. And I haven't called the guys back yet because it's a little better. I'm not in great pain. It's just, I'm getting little bits of gas mostly, and then the poop isn't really coming. It's sort of stuck or thick or not happening, and then it comes. But it's a real waiting process. Like there's
I would really recommend having it checked into, because they missed my cancer for several years. They misdiagnosed it as the tumor as a hemorrhoid. And then I had all the symptoms of colon cancer, a lot of them what you're describing. The summer before I was diagnosed, and my doctor kept thinking it was an intestinal virus. And
exactly. So I'm going to call the regional gastro guy and go in and talk to him.
Yeah.
It seems like it happened after the colonoscopy. Did they rough something up and it moved and it started to happen and it took 3 months to grow? And I don't know. Anyway, thank you. I just want to hear from you that I should just get on it.
I would say, have it checked out, because, I had this severe rectal bleeding.
I had no bleeding.
Well, not that some of my symptoms were like yours and some were different, but about 3 years before I was diagnosed, I was at Springwater, actually, where Nancy and I met, where I used to be on staff and leading a retreat there. And I had severe rectal bleeding the whole time.
Folks, I hate to interrupt, but there's two more people who...
It's really fast. This is just a one-liner.
Okay.
I'm so grateful for having cancer because there's this Melissa Green. She teaches at the Barshinger Cancer Center here in Lancaster, and it's only for cancer survivors and their caregivers. And we write from prompts that she brings in, weird little things, and we just write every week for a couple hours. And it's like a family. It's the most amazing experience of going inside and meditate. It's amazing. And you're a writer, and I just want to say about writing when you have cancer or connecting with something like this, it's just phenomenal. And I just want to thank you for your books. Okay. And you about
And it's so great to see you again, and it's wonderful to have you here. So thanks for.
And cancer is such a big creative kick in the butt.
Yeah, it is.
I'm sorry, no pun intended.
It is. Thank you.
Thank you.
And all the best to you for checking this out.
Oh, it's been wonderful.
Yeah. So let me see. There's.
Bye.
Oh, Ellen is raising her hand.
Yes. Yeah. Let me bring her on.
I can just do that. Unmute. I just unmuted her.
Okay.
I took control. I seized control.
Well done, Joan.
Hi, Ellen. It's great to see you in person.
Hi. Yeah, kind of, sort of in person, right?
Yeah. Well, I only know her through Facebook, so this is
Right.
in person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
See you. Don's here too, but he hasn't got his face in the picture. Maybe he'll stick his face in.
Hi.
Hi.
So anyway, I was resonating with what you guys were talking about earlier. Once you have cancer, it's like always part of your life. So I went through endometrial cancer like 10 or so years ago, and what I noticed is that it hasn't come back at all, thank heavens. But anytime anything goes wrong, that's it. That's where my mind goes immediately. I was having some issues with vertigo, and so it's like, well, of course. So then I have a brain cancer, obviously, a brain tumor growing. That's the only possible explanation. But being able to now, having done more work in the spiritual area, being able to see that as just a pattern, a thought pattern, and step back from it has made all the difference. So that's good. But it doesn't go away. I mean, it's kind of like, children, they don't go away either. And the other thing I was thinking about when you were talking about the pain, it is definitely the story about the pain, the fear around the pain. And if you can step back from the story and the fear, then it's ever so much more palatable.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like being in labor. I remember when you're in the middle of labor, you're not. I wasn't afraid of it, so I wasn't resisting it. So it wasn't this horrible thing that I had thought it was going to be prior to, when I was afraid of it and what it might be like and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Just those two. Don says it looked horrible to him. Yeah. So yeah, the pain it's better without the stories.
Yeah, it's so true that that anything we can imagine that might happen to us, if it does happen, it's never the same as what we imagined.
Exactly.
I mean,
yeah.
It's just never the same as what we imagined.
Yeah, it isn't, and
it's not necessarily less painful, but it's it's just not what we imagined. And yeah.
Well, in fact, the whole cancer experience, when it's lived, in the immediacy of it, is actually quite different. It turns out often to be quite different from what we imagine it to be.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something so wholesome about, just being in it, because it's such a surprise often.
Mm-hmm. And you just have to give yourself up to it and go with the ride. And like, okay, well, I guess we're doing this now.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing for me is it's really, I feel ever more grateful to be alive. It's just
Right.
really, and it started when they first diagnosed it, and I said, what happens if I do nothing? And they said, well, you'll probably be dead in a couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, okay, let's do the surgery and the chemo and everything. It's like and then all the support I got, it was like kind of realizing how many people cared about me and loved me.
Yeah.
And, there are just so many things that kind of unfold that you.
Yeah.
It left me with a really deep gratitude for
Mm-hmm.
every moment of life. And,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, and
Good.
we really never do know how the decisions go either, because I'm just thinking of a beautiful teacher, Joan Tollifson, who I had a conversation with just a few months before she died of lung cancer. And when she was diagnosed, she basically just decided that that was it for her,
Yeah. Well, that's kind of what
And
oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
No, that's kind of what because as I've aged, I've been thinking about, if an exit door shows up, will I take it? And if the cancer did come back, my cancer, and I was faced with many rounds of chemotherapy or something, and, I don't know. Well, the one thing I learned from this is that you don't know what you'll do until you're in the situation. But,
Yes.
I don't want to get to be really old and completely infirm and unable to take care of myself and have dementia and everything. So it's like I had been thinking before this happened, if an exit door shows up, will I take it, or will I go for treatment? And so it was this kind of revelation to me when they said, well, you'll probably be dead in 2 weeks. And it was like, actually what came up was, I've got to finish my book. That can't happen.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I had just started writing one of my 2 books right before I had the diagnosis, and the person who was helping me, afterwards she said, you shouldn't have had this kind of cancer, yada yada yada, like, and it could have been the other diagnosis, it could have been the other outcome, and I'm so glad it wasn't, and so forth and so on. And my only response, my gut response was, well, I had things that I had to do, so it couldn't have gone any other way than it did. So you have things that you need to do too, and so
apparently so.
Yeah.
Until you don't.
Yeah.
And sometimes, sometimes the decision is that it is time to go.
Oh, yeah.
That can be
At some point it will be.
I can easily imagine, and I'm very grateful to live in a state where we have the right to, medically assisted dying. And I can easily imagine, that if the cancer were to come back, I might elect not to go on with round after round of chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're up here just outside of Eugene, and have a friend who actually made that choice recently too, to a woman who had pancreatic cancer, and she chose to leave early rather than stick around for the inevitability.
In a beautiful way.
And it was a really beautiful experience for everybody around her too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's somebody else raising their hand.
Yes, Nancy wanted to come back, so I'm just going to bring her back.
Thank you, Ellen.
Okay. Thanks, Joan. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Okay, Nancy, I've unmuted you. Oops. I'm not.
There, I unmuted her, I think. No, why isn't it working?
Because we're kind of undoing each other, Joan.
Okay,
Can you stop for a moment?
Yeah.
Okay, Nancy, I think you may need to unmute yourself, because I'm not able to.
Oh, here I did. I just did.
Okay, perfect.
When all else fails, do it yourself, right? Yeah.
That's right.
So, well, I just want to say to Jmir, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing your name right.
Debbie.
Yes. Debbie. Debbie. Okay. That my cancer was undetected for 3 years. And yet I had a lot of symptoms, and I kept going for checks, and they couldn't find anything.
Wow.
So please heed Joan's advice and get it checked out really soon. Okay? Yeah.
And what I was actually gonna say was that, you know, when I had the rectal bleeding, I went to my my gastroenterologist, and he said, I don't think we need to do a colonoscopy because it was probably travel stress. And that made no sense to me. I mean, I've never had rectal bleeding on any other trip.
Yeah,
And
right.
it was a delightful trip. And so, but I was really happy not to think, you know, I didn't want to go through a colonoscopy. So I was happy to accept this. And I said, great, okay. And, you know, in retrospect, I wish I'd had that colonoscopy.
Yeah.
So
There's one more thing I wanted to say, and Joan, you can do this via email to me. You know, I teach mindfulness meditation, and I've been teaching at the Inova Hospital Centers here in Northern Virginia, the Life with Cancer program, which, if any of you know, anyone who lives in Northern Virginia, is an incredible program for people with cancer and their families, and everything is free. It's a remarkable program. But I wanted to pick your brain about what these are people who are just coming into meditation for the first time. And if you had any great books or things that you would recommend that I look at, or things, you know, quotes or things, that would be very helpful. I'm teaching out of John Kabat-Zinn, you know, I studied with him at UMass Med, and I'm teaching out of another woman's book, Dr. Rezvan Amili, who is at NIH, National Health Institutes in Bethesda. But, you know, maybe some more personal stuff from you, or whatever insights you have, that would be really helpful. These are people who are just starting out pretty much. And they're amazing because they've been through this journey. There's a degree of openness, you know, gratefulness that, hey, I'm alive. And this is, it's really quite wonderful to teach this class. It's like, hey, you guys are way ahead of the curve, you know. It amazes me. I'm very grateful for this experience. So thank you.
thank you. Yeah, sounds like a great work. I think we're a little at the end of the time, aren't we, Grace?
Yes, we're kind of at the end of our 1.5 hours. Thank you, Nancy. Maybe Joan, if you can think of a book. I can't think of anything right now. But
Well, I think of Tony Packer as what comes to mind, who's our, you know, where we met.
Yeah.
Because I've always, you know, really resonated with her very open approach to, you know, meditation, rather than giving people sort of a method, like, you know, just kind of this open attention to what's happening. And that would be my approach probably, but I don't say that that's the only way either, you know. And
well, it's kind of the approach I've been taking, you know, for sure, you know. So
wonderful. It's wonderful that, you know, meditation teaching has and mindfulness has entered the medical establishment. That's just such a great gift.
And I think the medical establishment is really going through a lot of changes, and has been over the course of my whole lifetime, you know, from the medical establishment of my childhood, where they were all in white coats and smoking cigarettes and you know, basically did what they said and you had no control, to the medical system now, where they really are, maybe not always perfectly, but they really are, you know, like my oncologists have said, you know, if the cancer metastasizes, we'll talk about, you know, how much treatment you want to have, or do you just want comfort care, you know, and it's your choice. And, you know, they're really, they're changing, you know. I think I've seen big changes in the medical system over my lifetime. And that's not to say everything's perfect, but I think they've learned a lot and are learning a lot. And that, you know, and a lot more women are in the medical field now, which I think is part of it, actually. And anyway, I'm going on, and I guess we have to stop.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, I think awareness is dawning in many ways, including in the medical system, you know.
And Yeah, and they're kind of questioning the whole philosophy of keeping people alive as long as possible at any cost, and really looking at, a bigger picture. So, well, this has been so lovely, and it's been so wonderful to, there are people here I didn't get a chance to say hi to, but have seen many people I recognize. So thank you all for showing up. And Grace, thank you so much.
Thank you, Joan, for coming to speak with me again, and inviting others into this conversation. I think it's such an important topic these days, cancer, and so many people are dealing with it.
Yeah.
And it's such an opportunity, it can be such a gift. And it's important that that message gets out there also. So thank you. Thank you for speaking with us. And thank you to all of you for coming. And we'll see you again soon.
Okay. Thank you all.
Yeah. And donations are appreciated. Thank you very much for keeping this series alive.
Yeah, I want to say that Grace is shy about asking for money, but I feel like I really want to see you get supported for the wonderful work you do, Grace. Because it's a lot of work putting it together.
Thank you. Okay. See you again soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.